The night was quiet but not peaceful. The stars above the refugee camp blinked like cold eyes. Watching silently, in a small tent at the edge of the camp, an alien mother named Valari sat beside a wooden cradle. The cradle was empty, yet she sang to it every night. Her voice soft, broken and filled with sorrow. Her lullaby floated through the air like a ghost, and the others in the camp whispered about her behind her back. "She's lost it," one alien woman muttered, shaking her head. "Poor Valari still thinks her baby is alive," said another. But Valari didn't hear them, or maybe she didn't care. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body thin from not eating, but her voice still had strength. She sang the same melody every night, the one she had made for her daughter the day she was born. 2 weeks ago, raiders had attacked the camp. They were fast, cruel, and showed no mercy. In the chaos, some people died, some were taken, and some disappeared. Valari's baby, Sari, was one of the missing. The others said Sari was gone, but Valari refused to believe it. "She's not dead," she whispered to the stars. "She's just lost, and I will call her home." And so, she sang every night with hope and heartbreak mixed in every word. Her fingers would brush the soft blanket still inside the cradle, the same blanket her daughter used to sleep in. It still smelled like her baby even now. Meanwhile, far away on the edge of a human settlement outpost, a human janitor named Marco was sweeping the floor of an old storage building. He was used to being ignored. The soldiers didn't talk to him. The engineers walked past him, and the officers barely knew his name, but Marco didn't mind. He liked quiet jobs and didn't ask for much until he heard something strange. It was faint at first, a tiny sound like a bird. Or a child. He stopped sweeping, tilted his head, and listened. Then he heard it again. A soft cry hidden deep behind a wall of supply crates. Marco rushed over, his heart pounding. He pulled back the boxes one by one, and then he froze. There, curled inside a discarded blanket, was a baby. Not human, but not completely alien either. Her skin was pale violet, her eyes glowing faintly even in the dark. She was weak, barely moving, her cries fading. Marco knelt down, lifted her gently into his arms, and stared at her tiny face. "What are you doing here, little one?" he whispered. The baby didn't answer, of course, but her small fingers grabbed his shirt tightly, as if begging him not to leave. Marco looked around, expecting someone to rush in, to say she belonged to them, but no one came. He waited, but no alarms rang. No names were called. No one knew she was here, or worse, they didn't care. He thought about turning her in, reporting it to the guards, but something inside him screamed no. He had seen how the guards treated the other alien children. Cold, cruel, unwanted. He looked back down at the baby. Her eyes blinked up at him slowly, and he saw something in them, a tiny light, like she was trying to speak through her soul. Marco took a deep breath. He wrapped her tightly in the blanket and stood up. He wasn't a hero or a fighter or a leader. He was just a janitor. But right now he was the only one who cared about this child, and that made him something else, something important. He whispered to her, "I don't know who you are, but I'll find your family." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't even know if she had a family, but it felt right. As he left the storage building with the baby in his arms, he didn't notice the strange humming in the air, like a lullaby carried by the wind. Back in the camp, Valari opened her eyes. She stopped singing for just a moment. The air felt different, her heart skipped a beat, and her hands trembled. She leaned over the empty cradle and whispered, "Siri?" But the cradle remained still. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But her lips moved again, and her lullaby returned. Even softer than before, but now far away. In the arms of a human janitor, a small baby blinked slowly and hummed back, just a note, just a sound. But it was there, and Marco felt it too, like something had begun. Something strange, something big, something he didn't understand yet. He looked up at the stars and said quietly, "We'll find your home." And the baby, eyes half closed, rested her head against his chest. Her hand still clutched his shirt, and for the first time, she slept peacefully. The baby stirred in Marco's arms, her small fingers twitching in her sleep. Her skin was cooler now, her breathing steady. Marco sat in his tiny ship, an old cargo runner he used to sleep in when jobs were low. He had wrapped her in a thick human blanket and placed her gently on a makeshift bed of towels. He didn't sleep, he just watched her. Something about her made it impossible to look away. She was strange, yes, but she was also beautiful, and more than anything, she was alone outside the dusty window. The human outpost buzzed with life. Trucks moved cargo, guards marched, loudspeakers barked orders. But inside this small ship everything was quiet. Except for one thing, a sound, soft and slow, a hum like a lullaby. But not human. It floated in the air like a memory. Marco leaned closer to the baby, his heart racing. It was coming from her. She was humming in her sleep, the same melody he'd heard in his mind before. He hadn't imagined it, his eyes widened, and he whispered, "Where did you learn that, little one?" And of course she didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The lullaby wasn't just a song, it felt like a signal, a message, a call across space. Marco opened his old communicator and connected to the outer net. He began searching. Alien reports. Missing persons, refugee manifests, raid survivor logs. Most of the files were locked or scrambled. But after an hour of digging, he found something. A raid had taken place just 2 weeks ago on a desert refugee camp. Multiple dead, some kidnapped, others missing. One name was listed as still searching. Siri, child of Valari, species Zellari. A newborn Marco stared at the screen, the baby's name glowing back at him. "Siri," he whispered, and the baby stirred. She didn't cry, but her head turned slightly like she knew the sound, like it was home. Back in the desert camp, Valari woke from a restless sleep. She had fallen asleep by the empty cradle again, her arms wrapped around the thin blanket. But this time something was different. She had heard it too. The hum. It came to her like a breeze in a dream, not just heard. Felt her baby was alive, she knew it. Tears ran down her cheeks as she stood slowly and whispered, "You're still singing." No one in the camp believed her. They tried to feed her. Calm her, tell her to rest, but Valari refused. "I heard her," she said again and again. "She's not gone." The others shook their heads. Pity in their eyes, they thought it was grief. Madness, weakness, but Valari didn't need them to believe. She just needed to keep singing on the ship. Marco looked down at the child as she finally opened her eyes. They glowed, soft purple, gentle but deep. He reached for a small packet of formula, one meant for human infants. He didn't know if it would work. But it was all he had, to his surprise. The baby drank it slowly, carefully, and when she finished, she reached up and placed her small hand on Marco's chest. The hum grew louder for just a moment, and Marco felt something strange, a memory that wasn't his, a field of stars, a melody, a mother's soft voice in the dark. "What are you?" he whispered, voice shaking. He wasn't scared, but he was overwhelmed. He had seen many things as a janitor in alien war zones, ruined planets and refugee stations, but nothing like this. Not a baby that could sing across galaxies, not a baby that shared memories. Not a baby who still reached for her mother with a voice made of light. He stood and walked to the control panel. He knew where the camp was, the one from the report. It was far, days across desert and dangerous terrain. The roads were closed, storms were coming, and trespassing meant death. But Marco didn't care. He set the coordinates, powered the ship, and whispered, "I'll take you back." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky as a storm rolled in. Dust swirled in the air, covering the glass of the cockpit. Marco tightened his grip on the controls and looked at Sari. "You're not just some alien baby," he said, voice firm now. "You're someone's daughter." The engines roared to life. The ship shook as it lifted off the pad. Alarms beeped, unauthorized launch, but Marco pushed forward anyway. He didn't care about the rules anymore. Somewhere out there, a mother was still singing, and her baby had answered back as they flew into the storm. Marco looked down and saw Sari smiling for the first time, just a small smile, weak and soft but real, and in that moment, he knew he had done the right thing. Whatever it cost him, wherever it led him, he would bring her home. The ship trembled as it flew low through the stormy skies. Winds howled like angry spirits outside, and lightning flashed in the distance. But inside the old cargo ship, Marco kept his hand steady on the controls. The baby, Siri, was wrapped in layers of blankets, safe inside a small basket Marco had secured to the co-pilot's seat. She didn't cry, she didn't make a sound, but her eyes followed Marco closely, as if she understood everything he was doing. Marco didn't know much about babies, let alone alien ones, but something about this child felt different. She was calm, too calm, and sometimes when he looked at her too long, he felt strange images in his mind, fields of silver grass under twin moons, a soft voice whispering words in a language he couldn't speak, warm hands holding a tiny body, singing, always singing. He blinked and shook his head. "This isn't normal," he muttered. Sari blinked back, her glowing eyes shining softly in the dim cabin light. He reached toward the console and checked the map again. The camp was still 2 days away, maybe less if he flew low through the canyon routes. But those were dangerous, too narrow, filled with winds and dust devils still. He didn't have time to wait back in the desert camp. Valari sat beside the cradle with a small wooden carving in her hand. It was a figure of a baby, one she had shaped from scraps during the night since Sari vanished. She ran her fingers along the tiny carved arms and whispered softly, "I know you're out there, my heart tells me." The other refugees passed by her tent quietly, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to remind her that Sari was likely dead. But Valari never stopped believing. Each time the wind howled at night, she could hear the hum in her bones. It was faint, but real. The old priest, blind and ancient, approached her that evening. He leaned on his staff and said in a cracked voice, "Do you still sing, child?" Valari nodded, wiping her tears. "Every night," she said, "until she hears me." The old priest smiled and sat beside her. "Then I will listen," he said, "because some songs can find their way across stars." On the ship, Marco felt the engine sputter. A flashing red light appeared on the control panel. "Fuel low," he cursed under his breath, knowing he should have refueled before fleeing the outpost. But it was too late now. He checked the map again, eyes searching for any outposts or way stations along the canyon route. There was one, an abandoned mining outpost built by an old alien trade group. He'd passed it years ago during cleanup duty. It might still have supplies, or it might be full of scavengers. He didn't have a choice. He turned the ship toward the canyon, the wind slamming hard against the wings. Sari made a soft sound, not a cry, more like a hum, and Marco glanced over, surprised. She had closed her eyes and was humming again. The same song. But this time, louder. Marco didn't just hear it, he felt it in his chest. His heartbeat began to match the rhythm. It was peaceful, yet full of pain, like a memory from someone else's life. He landed the ship roughly beside the old mining outpost, dust swirling all around. The building was mostly intact. Steel doors rusted, broken signs in 3 different languages. Marco stepped out slowly, holding Sari close to his chest. The baby didn't make a sound, just stared at the ruined walls with quiet focus. He kicked open a side door and entered, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. The rooms were dark and silent, filled with old crates and broken machines. But then, he heard it, a chime, like wind passing through hollow pipes. It echoed through the room, soft and strange. Suddenly, symbols lit up on the walls, glowing alien script, ancient and humming with energy. Marco froze, eyes wide. Sari began to glow faintly, her skin pulsing with soft light. The symbols responded, pulsing back in perfect rhythm. The room came alive. A panel opened in the wall, revealing a screen. Words appeared in a strange dialect, but the translator picked up just enough to show their meaning. Name Sari. Bloodline Valari.
Status lost,
Marco whispered. This place. It knows her. The screen flickered again and one more message appeared. Bond. Active. Voice imprint received. Mother signal detected. Marco staggered back, heart pounding. Her mother. She's still singing. He breathed. Sari reached out one tiny hand toward the glowing wall. Her hum grew stronger, filling the air like warm music, and Marco, standing in the center of this alien ruin, felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't just returning a lost baby anymore. He was holding a bridge between 2 hearts that remembered each other across space. He whispered, "You remember her." And Sari, with a tiny smile, hummed once more, soft, perfect. And far away in the camp, Valari suddenly stopped breathing for a second. Then she opened her eyes and whispered, "Sari, you're coming home." The sky above was a deep red, filled with dust and ash. Winds screamed like wild animals across the canyon. Marco wrapped Sari tightly in a thick scarf and checked the ship's systems. The power cells were drained, fuel near empty, and the comms were fried. He was stranded, but he didn't care because now he knew. Sari wasn't just some orphaned alien child. She had a name, a voice, a mother, and the mother was singing somehow across the stars. Marco stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the sand. The wind nearly pushed him backward. He tightened his scarf, goggles in place, and held Sari close to his chest. "I'm getting you home," he whispered. Sari blinked slowly. Not crying, not scared, just watching him, like she trusted him completely. The canyon ahead stretched like a jagged scar across the desert, narrow, twisting, with cliffs that could crumble at any second. It was the fastest way to the camp, but also the most dangerous. Marco didn't hesitate. He took his first step into the storm. Back at the camp, Valari stood outside her tent, the wind lifting her long silver hair. Her eyes stared out over the dunes, unblinking. The others watched her from a distance, whispering. "She hasn't eaten again," someone said. "She's just waiting to die," said another. But the old priest shook his head. "No," he said. "She's waiting for something." Valari closed her eyes and began to hum once more, her voice soft but steady. The wind caught her song and carried it across the wasteland. Miles away, Marco paused. He felt the wind shift. He tilted his head and heard it, faint and far. The same song Siri had been humming, now it echoed through the storm. He looked down and Siri was humming again. Eyes closed, face calm. They were getting closer. He picked up his pace, pushing forward into the sandstorm. The wind cut at his skin like knives. Sand filled his boots and stung his lips. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder. But Marco didn't stop. Sari's warmth against his chest was like a light, guiding him forward. Hours passed. The sun vanished behind thick dust clouds. He reached a jagged slope, sharp rocks jutting out like broken teeth. He climbed with bare hands, blood mixing with dirt. His legs screamed in pain, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. Siri began to glow again. The light from her skin illuminated the rocks, casting shadows that danced across the walls and the song. It was louder now. He wasn't just hearing it in his ears, he was feeling it in his bones. A mother's voice calling out, a child's voice answering back. He reached the top of the ridge, and below he saw it. A thin trail, barely visible through the blowing sand, leading to the outer edges of the refugee camp. He dropped to his knees, breathing hard, tears mixed with sweat on his face. They were almost there. He stood slowly, cradling Sari in his arms once more. "We made it," he whispered, "almost." At that same moment, in the camp, Valari collapsed. Her body couldn't take the hunger, the exhaustion, but her mouth still moved. Still singing, the priest rushed to her side, cradling her gently. "She's near," Valari whispered. "Barely conscious. I saw her. I felt her. In the storm." The priest nodded, his old hands trembling. He raised his staff high and struck it to the ground 3 times. A signal. One the old one still remembered. A call to watch the skies. And so they gathered one by one on the edge of the dunes, old and young, broken and tired. They looked out at the storm, eyes filled with doubt, until one young girl gasped and pointed. "There!" she shouted. Through the wind, through the red mist, a figure appeared, bent, slow, wrapped in cloth, carrying something. Step by painful step it moved forward. Marco didn't stop. Even when he saw the silhouettes appear before him, even when his legs nearly gave out, he kept walking, because Sari's eyes were now glowing brighter, and her hum had become a whisper. She was calling someone, and that someone was calling her back. As he crossed the final rise, the wind died suddenly. Like the storm itself bowed in silence. Before him stood dozens of aliens. But one dropped to her knees, Valari. Weak and shaking, her lips parted in disbelief, her arms trembled as she reached forward. "Sari," she breathed. Marco stepped forward. He said nothing. He simply placed Sari into her mother's arms. The moment their skin touched, a burst of soft light glowed between them. Sari made a sound, a wordless cry, and then she stopped humming, because she no longer needed to call. She had been found. Valari held her close, rocking side to side, tears falling freely. Her song was over, because her baby was home. Night fell quickly over the desert. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the wind ever was. Campfires glowed dimly in the distance as the refugees returned to their shelters, but one group remained gathered outside, surrounding a miracle they never expected to witness. Valari sat in the sand, holding Sari tightly against her chest. She hadn't stopped crying since Marco placed the child in her arms. Her voice was hoarse, her lips cracked, but her hands never shook. Sari slept peacefully now, warm in the safety of her mother's arms, and the empty cradle in Valari's tent finally had no purpose. It would remain empty because its reason to exist had returned to life. Marco stood a few steps away. Unsure of what to do, he felt out of place now, like a stranger who had stepped into someone else's sacred dream. He looked at Valari, but she didn't look back. Her eyes were locked on Sari. her heart beating to the rhythm of a lullaby that no longer needed to be sung. The old priest stepped beside Marco, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You carried the child through the storm," he said quietly. "You brought her back." Marco nodded, unsure how to answer. He felt tired, more tired than ever, but in his exhaustion, he also felt something else, peace. "She was alone," Marco said softly. "I couldn't leave her." The priest smiled, his old eyes cloudy but kind. "There is a bond between those who choose to love without being asked," he said. "You didn't save just a child, you saved a mother's soul." Valari finally looked up, her eyes meeting Marco's for the first time. Tears still glistened on her cheeks, but now she smiled. Not a big smile, not bright or joyful, but real, honest, full of meaning, she whispered. "Thank you." Marco opened his mouth to respond, but no words came, so he just nodded. Then Siri opened her eyes. Her small hand reached up and touched her mother's face. And for the first time, Valari hummed again. Not a song of grief, but of comfort, a new melody, born from reunion. The winds around them grew still, and even the stars above seemed to lean closer. But not everyone in the camp was at peace behind the tents. Two shadowed figures whispered urgently. "That human wasn't authorized to enter," one hissed. "He took a child from the human outpost." "They'll come looking," the other replied, voice low and sharp. "Humans don't let their property disappear without asking questions." Marco didn't know it yet, but his journey wasn't over. Saving Siri had been just the beginning now. Something darker stirred beyond the horizon, and someone had taken notice of him that night. As the camp slept and Valari cradled Siri inside her tent, Marco sat alone by the edge of the cliff. Watching the stars, his hands were scraped, his legs sore, but his mind was awake. He thought about the moment he had found Siri inside that storage crate. The look in her eyes, the soft hum, and he wondered, who had put her there? Who had left her to die? Suddenly, he heard a rustle behind him. He turned quickly, ready to defend himself. But it was only Valari, carrying Siri in her arms. The baby had woken again, restless. Valari sat beside him, silent for a long time, then she spoke. "She still hums your name in her sleep." Marco blinked, surprised. "She knows you saved her," Valari added. "She remembers." "I'm no hero," Marco replied. "I'm just a janitor." Valari shook her head. "No," she said. "You are more than that. You walked through death for a child who wasn't yours. You gave my voice a reason to stop crying." Marco swallowed hard. He looked at Siri, who reached out her tiny hand and touched his arm. And in that moment he felt the hum again, faint, quiet, but still there, a connection, not just between mother and child, but between all three of them. "I don't know what happens next," Marco admitted. Valari looked out at the dark horizon. "Neither do I," she said, "but whatever comes, we face it together." Behind them, in the shadows of the rocks, unseen eyes watched. A small, silent drone hovered near the cliffs, its red lens recording everything. It had no heart, no soul, no feelings, but it had orders, and its signal pulsed silently toward the sky, carrying one message back to the outpost: target located, human with alien child. Prepare retrieval. Morning came slowly, dragging golden light over the dusty camp. The air was quiet, too quiet. Birds didn't chirp, winds didn't move, and the usual noises of the camp were still. People sensed something was coming, but no one spoke it out loud. Inside Valari's tent, the baby, Sari, lay asleep in a woven basket filled with soft cloth. Valari brushed her fingers gently over Sari's cheek, her eyes full of warmth. She had smiled more in the last 12 hours than in the last 12 days. But her smile faded when she noticed Marco standing at the flap of the tent. His face was tense, his eyes fixed on the sky. "Something wrong?" she asked quietly. Marco didn't answer at first. Then he turned, voice low. "They're coming." Valari stiffened. "Who?" "The outpost," he said. "The humans I took her from." Valari's heart dropped. She stood and looked at Sari, now softly humming in her sleep. "Will they take her?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Marco nodded slowly. "They might try." "She's not just a baby anymore," he added. "She's proof of something, something powerful." Outside, the camp guards spotted movement on the horizon. Dust clouds rising, vehicles approaching, 3 black transport trucks and 1 sleek hover car, military grade. They were coming fast, no banners, no warning. Panic spread like fire. People ran to hide, some packed bags, others disappeared into caves. The camp had seen violence before, and no one wanted to be caught in the middle. Marco stood in front of Valari's tent, arms crossed. He had no weapon, just a steel pipe he found near the old storage tent. Valari stepped out too, holding Sari close to her chest. The old priest limped forward and stood between them, his staff in hand. Others gathered behind them, not to fight but to witness. This wasn't just about a child anymore, this was about choice. The hovercar stopped 20 feet away. Its door opened, and a tall human woman stepped out. She wore a black uniform, her hair tied tight. A small badge gleaming on her chest, she looked at Marco with cold, tired eyes. "Janitor Marco Halden," she said sharply. "You are holding stolen government property." Marco's hands tightened on the steel pipe. "She's not property," he said. "She's a child." The officer didn't blink. "She was found in a restricted area and logged into our system as unclaimed biomatter." "She doesn't belong to anyone." Valari stepped forward, her voice trembling. "She belongs to me. She is my daughter." "Siri." The officer turned her gaze to Valari. "You have no proof," she said. "Only a name and a song. That won't stand in court." Marco stepped between them. "Then we don't go to court," he said. "You can tell your base the child died in the storm." The officer raised one eyebrow. "You're threatening me?" Marco didn't move. "I walked through a sandstorm, nearly died, just to get her home." "I'm not threatening you," he said. "I'm warning you. If you try to take her, I won't back down." The officer paused, then slowly stepped forward. "You're a janitor." "Marco," she said, voice lower now. "You clean floors? Empty bins. You're not a soldier." Marco looked down at Sari, then back up. "No," he said. "But I'm all she had. And now she has her mother again. And if that makes me a criminal, fine." The silence grew heavy. Even the guards behind the officer looked uneasy. One of them whispered, "She really does look like the woman," another said. "That baby's humming. How is she doing that?" The officer took one last look at Sari, and for a moment, just a moment, her face softened. She stepped back, tapped a button on her wrist. "Mission report," she said aloud. "Subject, untraceable, deceased in natural disaster." File closed. Then she turned to Marco. "This never happened." She climbed back into her hovercar, and within seconds the vehicles turned and drove away. Dust rose again and the silence remained. Marco dropped the steel pipe and exhaled for the first time in hours. Valari hugged Sari tighter, her whole body shaking. The old priest smiled, whispering to the wind. "Voices were heard today," he said, "not just from mouths, but from hearts." As the sun began to rise fully over the camp, Sari opened her eyes and made a soft sound. Not a hum, not a cry, a simple word, one no one taught her. "Home," Valari gasped, tears flowing again. Marco dropped to one knee beside them, and Sari reached out both hands, one for her mother, one for the man who had carried her through the storm. The sky over the refugee camp turned soft and golden. After days of dust, silence, and fear, the morning felt gentle. Birds returned to the rocks, singing quietly. Children peeked out of tents again, and for the first time in weeks, the camp felt like it could breathe. Inside her tent, Valari sat on the floor, Sari asleep in her lap. She gently rocked her daughter side to side, her hands trembling not from weakness but from peace. The lullabies she once sang to an empty cradle were no longer needed. Now there was no reason to call to the wind, no reason to cry under the stars, because the stars had finally answered. Sari stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked up at her mother, then over at Marco, who sat quietly in the corner. His back was against the tent wall. Legs stretched, arms folded. His clothes were still torn, dust-covered, his boots cracked. But on his face was a small, tired smile. "She's safe now," he said, voice low. Valari nodded, pressing a kiss to Sari's forehead. "She always was," she whispered. "Because of you." The old priest entered the tent quietly, carrying a small wooden box. He placed it between them and opened it, revealing an old, folded cloth, a Zalari ceremonial wrap. "We give this only when a soul returns to where it belongs," he said. He wrapped Sari gently in the cloth. Whispering ancient words, Marco watched quietly, not understanding the language but feeling the meaning in every word. Valari looked at Marco. "What will you do now?" she asked. Marco looked down at his hands. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I broke every rule getting her back here. Once they find out I'm still alive, someone might come looking again. Valari's expression tightened. I won't let anyone take her, she said, her voice suddenly strong. You don't have to, Marco replied. Not alone. He stood slowly, legs aching. I didn't just bring her back, he said. She brought me back too. For the first time in years, I did something that mattered. And I don't want to go back to sweeping floors and being invisible. Valari looked at him, her eyes softening. Then stay, she said. Marco blinked, surprised. Here. With us, she said, with me. He looked down at Sari, whose small fingers reached up and grabbed his. Her glowing eyes met his, and he felt it again. That connection. That hum in his chest that wasn't just a melody anymore. It was belonging. He knelt beside them, his hand still in Sari's tiny grip. I'm not her father, he said quietly. Valari smiled. No, she said. But you are her family, and mine, outside. The camp gathered again. The storm was over, and they had all witnessed something rare. A human had crossed a deadly desert, defied his own kind, and brought home what everyone else gave up on. Word spread fast. People began to whisper a new name, the human who returned a lost song. Later that day, the empty cradle was carried out of Valari's tent, but not to be used again. It was placed in the center of the camp, surrounded by flowers, stones, and candles, a symbol not of death but of what was found. The cradle that once held silence now held meaning, and every night, a new voice sat beside it, someone in the camp who had lost someone, and they would sing not to the wind but to hope. Marco spent his days helping build stronger tents, fixing broken pipes. He taught children how to read old signs in human script. He carried wood, dug wells, cleaned tools, and every night, he returned to Valari's tent where Sari would crawl into his lap and fall asleep. Valari began singing again too, not sad songs but lullabies full of light. And when she sang, Sari would laugh, and sometimes, so would Marco, and the camp listened, always smiling, because they knew songs no longer had to be sad to be powerful. One evening, as the three of them sat near the fire, Sari in Marco's arms, Valari leaned her head on his shoulder. I don't hear the wind anymore, she said. I used to hear it scream when I sang. Marco smiled, looking at the sleeping child. Maybe the wind doesn't need to carry your voice anymore, he said, because now, you don't have to sing to be heard. Valari closed her eyes, breathing deep. She said nothing more, because there was nothing left to say. Her baby was home, her arms were full, and the human who brought light back into her life had never left.